The Soviet Union was founded in 1922, very much because of World War I, and it included Russia and joined many other countries to the south of it, and was the successor of the Russian Empire. Throughout the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the Soviet Union was in an economic crisis and they split up into 15 separate countries. But how did this happen? The Soviet Union used to be an extreme power for about 70 years, more powerful than the United States at that time. But what happened? How did the Soviet Union fall apart? The Cold War started in 1945 and lasted all the way until the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. The Cold War was the most important war during the fall and rise of the Soviet Union because it was the main war and it also lasted the longest. The Cold War got its name of cold because there was rarely the heat of gunfire in actual battle. The war was fought indirectly, like the race for space. The United States landed on the moon before the Soviets did, so it's like they won a battle. During the first term of President Ronald Reagan from 1981 to 1985, he increased the United States spending money for the military an extraordinary amount of 7% of the GDP, or gross domestic product, because all of the tension the Soviets were provoking. But because of this, the Soviets increased their spendings for the military to 27% of their GDP. This started to cause economic problems for them. The Soviet Union started to collapse into separate independent countries in 1985 after they failed to reform and change their economy. The Soviet Union finally collapsed in 1991 when they couldn't take their economic problems anymore.
It came with a new modern form of government, previously unheard of in the large empire that was ruled by a monarchy. The first major conflict it participated in was World War II, in which the USSR sided with the Allies. If that wasn't enough, its citizens lived in constant anxiety after the aftermath era of the Cold War, fearing an inevitable conflict between their country and America. The U.S. finally emerged victorious with its pioneering first voyage to the moon on Apollo 11, though the tensions did not entirely subside until the early 90s. The main cause of the fall of the Soviet Union was its poor and weak leadership, although some of this was due to bad luck. After the death of Brezhnev, the leadership started to fall apart as two old, sick men quickly died in office. So the young Mikhail Gorbachev was forced to become the head of office, and this was the final straw in the collapse of the massive empire.
In the 1970s, the Soviet Union and the US signed the SALT I arms, bringing in an age of détente, the easing of hostility towards each other, to the downfall of the Soviet Union in the 90s, their reign lasting almost a century. Gorbachev introduced glasnost, a term literally meaning openness. The purpose of this campaign was the freedom of press and the free flow of information. The press exposed the government's mistakes and the deficiency of the Soviet Union's economy relative to the prospering nations. The press damaged Gorbachev's party, also another factor that led to the fall of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev then introduced perestroika, meaning restructuring or reconstruction. Perestroika was Gorbachev's campaign to revitalize the Soviet system, based upon their economy and political system. Those two campaigns led to the absolute downfall of the Soviet in 1991. The Perestroika campaign wasn't even allowed to be implemented due to the collapse of the Soviet Party. People argue that even if Perestroika took action, it still wouldn't fix the problems, believing that the Soviet system was unfixable. There were two reasons that led to Gorbachev's reform, which conclusively led to the Soviets' downfall. Economy. The USSR were going broke from keeping up with the US due to Reagan's defense buildup. Politically, Gorbachev saw that the world was changing and the old Soviet repression just wasn't allowed in an age that had communications and commerce worldwide. Gorbachev's reform brought the collapse of the communism. Gorbachev's proposition to economics and political reform led to perestroika and glasnost, also the signing of the superpower treaty with the US to begin scrapping nuclear warheads. The Soviet Union denied Baltic states their independence along with imposing sanctions in Lithuania. In 1990, the head government officials detained Gorbachev in his villa, but soon were arrested themselves. In 1991, Gorbachev resigned from his position as Soviet president as the Soviet Union broke and collapsed.